Imagine a tank so massive, so over the top, that it could crush everything in its path, not just enemy vehicles, but entire roads, bridges, and buildings. This wasn't science fiction. This was Nazi Germany's P-1000 Rat, a super-heavy tank project that could have rewritten the rules of armored warfare if it had ever been built. By the early 1940s, Germany had already stunned the world with tanks like the Tiger and Panther. They were symbols of technological supremacy and battlefield dominance, but somewhere in the minds of the Reich's engineers, those machines weren't enough. The idea was bigger, bolder, almost absurd. A tank weighing over 1,000 tons, bristling with enormous cannons and secondary guns, and capable of smashing entire enemy lines. This was the P-1000 Rat. The concept was insane, even by the standards of the German war machine. It would be 10 times heavier than a Tiger tank, measuring over 35 meters long with 4 decks, multiple crew compartments, and weapons that could rival small artillery batteries. Its primary armament would have included a 280 naval gun, the kind usually mounted on battleships, while the secondary arsenal included twin 128 guns, machine guns, and anti-aircraft weapons. The Rat was essentially a battleship on tracks. Why did Germany even consider such a thing? By 1942-43, Hitler and his engineers were obsessed with wonder weapons that could turn the tide of the war. Conventional tanks were effective but could be destroyed. Hitler wanted something unstoppable, a symbol of German engineering that would terrify the Allies. The P-1000 Rat fit that vision perfectly. An enormous, almost indestructible war machine that could dominate any battlefield it touched. Early designs showed a tank with a crew of 20 men, drivers, gunners, mechanics, and commanders, all operating in separate compartments. Each section had specialized tasks to manage the monstrous vehicle. Propulsion was another mind-bending challenge. Engineers envisioned multiple submarine diesel engines working in tandem to move this colossal tank, though top speed was expected to be barely 20 km/h. Even at that speed, a 1,000-ton machine barreling toward enemy lines would be devastating. The project wasn't just a matter of size. It required a complete rethink of logistics, engineering, and tactics. Roads, bridges, and railways couldn't support a tank of this weight. Only specially constructed paths could handle its mass. Ammunition supply for those massive guns would be a nightmare, and maintenance would be nearly impossible in a war zone. Simply moving the Rat to a battlefield would have been a logistical feat rivaling major military operations. Despite these challenges, engineers drafted detailed plans. Blueprints showed enormous suspension systems, reinforced tracks, and multiple turrets mounted like a fortress. One concept included a secondary turret on top of the main turret, providing overlapping fields of fire. Another suggested anti-aircraft mounts that could rain bullets on low-flying planes. The Rat wasn't just a tank, it was a self-contained mobile fortress. Hitler himself approved the concept enthusiastically, fascinated by its sheer audacity. He reportedly imagined it crushing enemy lines, impervious to artillery and small arms. Advisors tried to temper expectations, pointing out the impossibility of deploying such a machine, but Hitler was captivated. In his mind, the Rat could have been Germany's ultimate weapon, a literal juggernaut to break through the Allied forces. Engineers, however, faced near-impossible technical problems. The chassis had to support more than 1,000 tons, far exceeding the limits of existing metallurgy and suspension technology. The massive guns required naval-grade stabilization to fire accurately, and the engines. Even with multiple submarine engines, acceleration, turning, and even slight inclines would be difficult to manage. This wasn't just an engineering challenge, it was almost laughably impossible. Despite the technical hurdles, work began on detailed prototypes and models. Miniature versions were built to test suspension, weight distribution, and gun recoil. Calculations suggested that firing the main gun would send massive shockwaves through the tank itself unless carefully dampened. Each turret could weigh dozens of tons, and crew safety was another constant concern. A single miscalculation could crush the men inside. The Rat project became a case study in mad engineering. Hitler's fascination pushed it forward, while his generals and engineers quietly noted the impossibility of ever deploying it. Allies were unaware of the project at the time, but had such a machine existed, it would have posed a terrifying psychological threat. Imagine seeing a 1,000-ton tank slowly moving across the battlefield, guns the size of small buildings firing relentlessly, while infantry and smaller tanks fled in terror. Yet the practical reality was grim. Building the Rat would have consumed massive amounts of steel, fuel, and manpower at a time when Germany was already stretched thin. Entire factories would have had to dedicate themselves to one tank, making it a strategic liability as much as a potential weapon. Even if it reached the battlefield, it would have been a slow-moving target for air attack. The Allies' bombers could destroy it before it fired a single round. Still, the P-1000 Rat captured imaginations. Engineers and designers debated every detail obsessively: track width, turret rotation speed, armor thickness, crew efficiency, and firepower coordination. Some sketches included auxiliary tanks and armored tractors to tow the Rat if it got stuck, reflecting the extreme lengths needed just to make it mobile. Every new idea made it bigger, heavier, and more absurd, but also more fascinating. The Rat was a symbol of German obsession with scale and firepower over practicality. It embodied the bigger is better mentality taken to extremes, where imagination outpaced reality. Some contemporary engineers reportedly called it the ultimate folly, while others marveled at the ingenuity involved, even if it was doomed to remain a paper project. By 1943–44, the war situation had changed drastically. Resources were dwindling, factories were being bombed, and Germany could no longer afford to divert steel, fuel, and manpower to such an impractical project. The P-1000 Rat, like many of Hitler's wonder weapons, remained on paper, a dream of dominance that reality could never support. Yet the designs, the models, and the planning still survive today, giving us a glimpse into what might have been the most insane tank ever imagined. Some historians speculate what the Rat could have done if it existed. Its sheer size would have dominated any battlefield, its guns could have destroyed buildings, bunkers, and even small fortresses, and it could have terrorized enemy infantry. But the counterarguments are strong. Mobility issues, vulnerability to aircraft, and logistical impossibilities would have made it a one-shot wonder at best. Its legend, however, continues to fuel the imagination of tank enthusiasts and military historians worldwide. The story of the P-1000 Rat isn't just about a tank that never existed. It's about ambition, obsession, and the extremes of engineering under a regime that valued spectacle as much as strategy. It's a lesson in what happens when imagination meets impracticality, a fascinating glimpse at the madness that sometimes drives warfare innovation. In the next part, we'll dive into the technical madness of the Rat, its proposed armaments, armor, propulsion, and how engineers tried to make this colossal machine even conceivable. We'll explore the designs, the calculations, and the sheer scale of what would have been the world's largest tank. The P-1000 Rat wasn't just big, it was absurdly big, the kind of engineering dream that teeters on madness. Every detail, from its armor thickness to the size of its guns, was pushed to extremes. Engineers envisioned a tank that could shrug off any conventional weapon and crush everything in its path, but the practicality of building and operating it was a completely different story. Let's start with the armor. The Rat's designers imagined plates up to 360 mm thick on the front, riveted and reinforced to withstand almost any anti-tank weapon of the era. Secondary armor covered the sides and rear, still thick enough to render most artillery useless. This wasn't just protection, it was a fortress on tracks. For perspective, even the massive Tiger II, feared for its armor, was far lighter and far more mobile. The Rat made it look like a tank on steroids, with every inch designed to survive hits that would obliterate any other vehicle. But heavy armor created enormous problems. The sheer weight of over 1,000 tons meant that suspension and propulsion had to be engineered from scratch. Standard tank tracks would snap under the stress. Engineers proposed a system with 4 huge sets of tracks, each reinforced and mounted on multiple road wheels. Each track would carry part of the load, spreading the immense weight across a massive footprint. Still, crossing bridges, roads, or even uneven terrain would have been nearly impossible. It's easy to imagine a Rat stuck in a muddy field, immobile and vulnerable despite all its armor. Propulsion was equally insane. The designers suggested using 4 submarine diesel engines, producing a combined 8,000 horsepower to move this behemoth. Top speed was estimated at 20 km/h on flat ground, slower on any incline. Turning was another nightmare. The tank would need enormous gearing systems to rotate, and even minor maneuvers could take minutes. Acceleration, forget about it. The Rat would roll forward like a mountain, unstoppable once it had momentum, but slow and unwieldy in tight spaces. Now the guns, this is where the madness truly shines. The primary weapon was a 280 naval cannon, the kind normally mounted on battleships. It could fire shells weighing hundreds of kilograms over several kilometers, capable of leveling buildings, bunkers, and enemy vehicles alike. Mounted in a turret the size of a small house, it required massive recoil systems to prevent the tank from shaking itself apart every time it fired. Imagine a tank firing artillery shells the size of small cars and surviving the blast. Secondary armament included 2 128mm guns mounted in smaller turrets, providing additional firepower against enemy tanks and fortifications. Machine guns lined every possible approach, covering blind spots, while anti-aircraft guns were designed to fend off low-flying aircraft. In theory, the Rat could fight enemies on all fronts at once, an unstoppable fortress rolling across the battlefield. In practice, it would have been a slow, lumbering target for planes, artillery, and sabotage. Engineers also planned internal compartments with 20 crew members, each with a specialized role. Commanders, gunners, drivers, mechanics, and radio operators. Communication between sections would be critical, especially when coordinating the massive guns and the tank's movement. Life inside the Rat would have been cramped, hot, and loud, with vibrations from the engines and guns constantly shaking the interior. It wasn't a comfortable tank, it was a machine built for destruction, not human comfort. The logistical challenges were staggering. Moving the Rat to a battlefield required roads capable of supporting over 1,000 tons or specialized rail systems. Bridges had to be reinforced or avoided altogether. Fuel consumption would have been astronomical, and any mechanical failure would have been catastrophic. Imagine a 1,000-ton tank breaking down in enemy territory. It would be a sitting duck, impossible to recover. Despite all this, detailed blueprints were drawn, including diagrams showing the layout of the main turret, secondary turrets, engine compartments, and tracks. Each component was designed with precision, but the bigger the tank, the more impossible it became to realize. Engineers ran countless calculations, designing tracks that could handle the stress, turrets that could rotate despite weight, and engines that could even move the colossal vehicle at all. Yet they always knew there was a gap between imagination and reality. Hitler himself reportedly loved the idea. For him, the Rat wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement, a symbol of German engineering superiority. His generals tried to temper the enthusiasm, pointing out that no existing bridge could support it, that the Allies' air superiority would make it an easy target, and that the resources required could cripple other parts of the military. Hitler didn't care. He wanted a machine that could inspire awe, terror, and propaganda value, even if it never fought. Some proposed modifications were almost comical. Engineers suggested auxiliary tractors to tow the Rat if it got stuck, multiple cranes to reload ammunition, and even small armored boats for crossing rivers. Every idea made the project more complicated and more impractical, yet the ambition never stopped growing. It was a perfect example of how obsession and vision can outpace reality. By 1943–44, the Rat project was gaining notoriety, but the war situation was deteriorating for Germany. Factories were being bombed, resources were scarce, and the eastern and western fronts demanded attention. Despite detailed plans and models, the project never moved beyond paper. Fuel shortages, labor demands, and shifting priorities meant that building a 1,000-ton tank was impossible. The Rat remained a symbol of ambition, madness, and the extremes of wartime engineering. Historians often ask, what if the Rat had been built? Its guns could have destroyed enemy fortifications and its armor could have survived conventional attacks, but the drawbacks were glaring. Immobility, logistical nightmare, vulnerability to air attack, and the sheer impracticality of moving and supplying such a machine. In a real battle, it likely would have been a sitting target, destroyed before firing a single round. Yet the idea itself still captures the imagination, proof that sometimes the audacity of a design is enough to make it legendary. In the next part, we'll explore the psychological and propaganda aspects of the Rat, why Hitler loved it, how it influenced other projects, and the cultural legacy of a tank that never existed. We'll also dive into some of the smaller, crazier ideas proposed to make it even more monstrous. By the time the P.1000 Rat designs were circulating, the tank had already become legendary, even among the engineers and generals working on it. Hitler was obsessed. To him, the Rat wasn't just a weapon, it was proof that German engineering could conquer anything. He imagined it rolling across the battlefield, unstoppable, a literal juggernaut that would crush Allied forces beneath its tracks. Hitler's fascination influenced every discussion about the tank. He demanded bigger guns, thicker armor, and even more turrets. Some officers begged him to focus on practical weapons, pointing out that Germany's resources were dwindling, that the Allies controlled the skies, and that fuel shortages could immobilize even conventional tanks. Hitler didn't listen. In his mind, the bigger and more insane the better. It wasn't about feasibility, it was about awe, fear, and symbolism. The Rat became a propaganda dream. Imagine posters and newsreels showing the tank as an unstoppable monster of steel crushing enemy fortifications. Even if it never left the drawing board, the idea alone was powerful. It fed into the image of the Wehrmacht as technologically superior and unstoppable, inspiring fear among enemies, and hope among German citizens who were being told that a super tank could turn the tide of war. Engineers had to balance technical realities with Hitler's visions. They created scale models, detailed blueprints, and even 3D mock-ups of the turrets and main guns. Each design was more absurd than the last. Ideas for self-contained supply compartments, internal cranes to reload shells, and even anti-aircraft mounts capable of engaging multiple planes at once. Every iteration tried to satisfy both practical engineering concerns and Hitler's insatiable appetite for spectacle. The psychological aspect of the Rat project was as fascinating as the technical one. Hitler believed that the sheer presence of such a tank could demoralize enemy troops. Imagine soldiers on the battlefield hearing rumors of a tank so massive that artillery could not touch it, a machine bristling with guns and thick armor, moving like a mountain across the landscape. The Rat would have been a terror weapon even if it never fired a single shot. Generals and military planners struggled to respond. On one hand, the project was impractical and resource-draining. On the other, it had Hitler's personal attention. Engineers feared that questioning it too much could jeopardize their careers. They worked tirelessly on calculations for suspension, track durability, engine synchronization, and crew logistics, even knowing that the tank would likely never move beyond paper. The tension between genius and madness was palpable. The Rat also influenced other German superweapon projects. Designers began dreaming of even larger tanks, aircraft carriers on land, and self-propelled artillery monsters. Some of these ideas were partially implemented, but most remained on paper, feeding into a culture of extreme engineering ambition that often ignored battlefield realities. The Rat became a symbol of this bigger is better mindset, illustrating both the creativity and folly of wartime engineering under Nazi obsession. Cultural fascination with the Rat didn't stop at the war. After 1945, military historians, model makers, and enthusiasts pored over the blueprints, imagining what it would have been like if it had been built. Its absurd size, massive guns, and multiple turrets inspired books, documentaries, and even computer games. The legend of the Rat lives on, not as a weapon of war, but as a monument to imagination, obsession, and technological audacity. The psychological impact on German engineers is particularly interesting. Some were exhilarated by the challenge, seeing the Rat as the ultimate engineering puzzle. Others were terrified of the consequences, if it ever existed. The logistical nightmare, vulnerability to air attack, and sheer impracticality could ruin military operations. It became a test of creativity under extreme pressure, a project that balanced on the line between brilliance and madness. Hitler's obsession also highlights the disconnect between leadership and reality. While generals were thinking about fuel shortages, front lines collapsing, and Allied bombing campaigns, Hitler focused on a tank that weighed more than most ships and would have consumed astronomical resources. The Rat was less a weapon of war and more a psychological tool for the dictator, demonstrating his desire for awe-inspiring, overwhelming power. Even today, the P.1000 Rat fascinates because it shows the extremes of human imagination in wartime. It's a symbol of how obsession, ambition, and technological genius can combine into a single, almost mythical project. The tank never existed in reality, but its legend captures the imagination of engineers, historians, and enthusiasts alike. Some proposed ideas were particularly wild. There were sketches showing the Rat carrying auxiliary armored vehicles on its decks, like tiny supporting tanks, or mounting rocket launchers for long-range attacks. Designers even discussed using the tank as a mobile command center, capable of directing entire battles from inside its armored hull. Every concept was bigger, heavier, and more absurd than the last, yet each was a logical step in trying to satisfy Hitler's grand vision. By the end of 1944, reality caught up with fantasy. Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under Allied bombing raids, fuel was scarce, and the Eastern Front demanded every ounce of manpower and resources. The P.1000 Rat project was quietly shelved. No steel was poured, no engines assembled, and no guns mounted. It would remain a paper project, a monument to what could have been, and a cautionary tale about the limits of ambition in wartime. Yet the Rat's influence continued. Even abandoned, its blueprints inspired post-war tank design thinking, video games, and speculative fiction. The idea of a tank so large, so powerful, that it could dominate entire battlefields continues to captivate imaginations. Its story reminds us that sometimes the legend of a weapon can be more powerful than the weapon itself. In the next part, we'll dive into the what-ifs, exploring hypothetical scenarios if the Rat had been built, how it might have changed battles, and the legacy it leaves on engineering, military history, and popular culture. We'll also conclude with a reflection on ambition, obsession, and the thin line between genius and madness. Imagine the P.1000 Rat rolling onto a battlefield. Its main 280 gun firing massive shells, leveling buildings, bunkers, and any tank that dared approach. Secondary turrets firing 128 rounds, machine guns mowing down infantry anti-aircraft guns ripping through planes. For soldiers on the ground, it would have been terrifying, a literal moving fortress that seemed unstoppable. The psychological impact alone could have been devastating, yet even in this hypothetical scenario, practical problems abound. The rat would have moved at a crawling 20 km/h if the terrain allowed it. Any forest, hill, or bridge could trap it. Fuel consumption would have been astronomical, and keeping it supplied with ammunition would require entire logistics convoys devoted solely to the tank. The sheer scale of operations needed to support a single rat illustrates why it was never more than a dream. Air power would have been the rat's greatest enemy. Allied aircraft had already shown their ability to destroy even well-armored tanks with coordinated attacks. A 1,000-ton tank, slow and conspicuous, would have been a magnet for bombers and fighter bombers. No matter how thick its armor or how massive its guns, a well-placed aerial attack could have neutralized it. Its enormous size, meant to intimidate, would also make it a perfect target. Still, it's impossible to ignore the engineering genius behind the concept. Every component was meticulously planned. Suspension systems to carry the weight, turrets designed to rotate massive cannons, crew compartments organized for efficiency, and multiple engines coordinated to move the colossal frame. The rat was a marvel of imagination, combining creativity, physics, and ambition in a way that few wartime projects ever have. The legacy of the P-1000 Rat extends beyond its technical specifications. It serves as a cautionary tale about ambition without practicality, illustrating the limits of even the most brilliant engineering under extreme circumstances. Military planners and historians study it as an example of how obsession and ideology can shape, and sometimes warp, technological development. It's a lesson in balance. Power and size are impressive, but mobility, logistics, and battlefield realities cannot be ignored. Culturally, the rat lives on as one of the most infamous what-ifs of World War II. It has inspired books, documentaries, museum exhibits, and even video games. Fans of military history and engineering marvel at the sheer audacity of the concept, imagining what a real rat could have done and marveling at the mind that dared to design it. It is simultaneously awe-inspiring and terrifying, a testament to human ambition taken to extremes. Some enthusiasts have modeled its hypothetical battlefield impact. A fully operational rat could have destroyed fortifications and tanks with ease. Infantry might have been overrun by the machine's secondary weapons. The sheer psychological shock of encountering a tank that looked more like a battleship on land could have caused panic among enemy troops. Yet all this potential would have been tempered by vulnerability. Its slow speed, fuel needs, and conspicuous size make it equally susceptible to air attacks, ambushes, and sabotage. The rat in reality would have been a double-edged sword. The story of the P-1000 Rat also serves as a reflection on human ambition and obsession. It's easy to mock the project as insane, but it also demonstrates the incredible creativity and determination of engineers working under extreme conditions. Every drawing, calculation, and model represented years of thought, skill, and daring imagination. Even if it was never built, the project pushed the boundaries of what was conceivable in armored warfare. In some ways, the rat is more powerful as a legend than it could ever have been as a weapon. Its fame lies in imagination and audacity rather than battlefield effectiveness. It challenges our understanding of engineering, war, and ambition, showing that sometimes the story of an idea can be as compelling as the reality. The P-1000 Rat is a monument to the extremes of human creativity, a machine that existed more vividly in thought than in steel. As the war progressed, the Rat project quietly faded away. Germany's collapsing infrastructure, lack of materials, and desperate need to focus on practical weapons meant that the world's largest tank would remain a fantasy. Yet the legacy of its madness continues, reminding us that war is not only about strategy and logistics, it is also about the ideas that drive nations, the obsessions that push human creativity, and the limits of what can actually be achieved. Ultimately, the P-1000 Rat teaches multiple lessons. It reminds engineers and historians that imagination must be tempered by reality. It shows how ambition, when untethered, can produce projects that inspire awe but achieve nothing in practice. And it leaves us with one of history's most fascinating questions. What if the German supertank had actually existed? How would it have changed battles, inspired fear, or collapsed under its own weight? The answers are speculative, but the story itself is unforgettable. The P-1000 Rat may never have rolled onto a battlefield, but it will always roll in our imagination. It embodies human ambition, technological daring, and the fine line between genius and madness. Its story captivates because it shows both the incredible potential of human invention and the absurdity of reaching too far. It's a warning, a marvel, and a legend all at once. If you want to see another incredible story of wartime engineering that almost changed history, check out the next video. It's another tale of ambition, madness, and machines that could have rewritten battles forever.